Hello, friends and neighbors, and welcome again to the poem of the day for today, Saturday, August 16th, 2025. As you can see, again, we're joined by our friend Cooper back there on my chair. He's just sort of chilling and looking out at the backyard on what's really a beautiful day, even though it's stiflingly hot out there. It's very nice to look at. Pretty clear blue sky, very green grasses and leaves on the trees. And that coincides a bit with what we're going to hear in the poem today, which I kind of betrayed my usual way of finding a poem, which is to just kind of flip through and see what speaks to me. This morning, I felt really drawn back to Alfred Lord Tennyson. I did a poem of his earlier in this series, and he was one whom I had encountered when I studied, and a poet that I knew of, but could not have told you a whole lot specifically about. I don't know that I could have distinguished his style much from his peers at the time, but there was something about that first poem I read that stuck with me and really gripped me, and I came across this one this morning called The Higher Pantheism, which has a pretty provocative title right away. Pantheism being something that I wouldn't normally associate with people who occupy kind of the image that Tennyson has, at least if you look at artistic renderings of him. And within that title, The Higher, he is making an argument right away that, there is a lower pantheism, but also in a sense that pantheism is a kind of more sophisticated or higher way of seeing or thinking about God and the cosmos. And this poem, I believe it was written in let me check notes here really quickly, 1867 is what I believe. And it was read at the inaugural meeting of the Metaphysical Society, which I don't know a whole lot about, but I do know that it was primarily clergymen that would meet and discuss these philosophical and theological questions about the nature of God. Like kind of most things at the time, it was a men-only invitation, a men-only society, and Tennyson could not attend himself, but someone read this poem in his stead. It was pretty controversial and provocative, such that it inspired a parody called The Higher Pantheism in a Nutshell. I believe the guy's name was Algernon Charles Swinburne who wrote this, which again is a pretty great name. And it mirrored and mimicked a lot of the style of Tennyson's poem, but then it just put forth these kind of absurd aphorisms. So he was using the style to mock what he saw was kind of a nonsense expression within the poem. So I'm going to go ahead and read it now and offer a few brief reflections at the end. This is The Higher Pantheism by Alfred Lord Tennyson, 1867. The sun, the moon, the stars, the seas, the hills and the plains, are not these, O soul, the vision of him who reigns? Is not the vision he, though he be not that which he seems? Dreams are true while they last, and do we not live in dreams? Earth, these solid stars, this weight of body and limb, are they not sign and symbol of thy division from him? Dark is the world to thee. Thyself art the reason why. For he is not all but thou, that hast power to feel, I am I. Glory about thee, without thee, and thou fullest thy doom, making him broken gleams and a stifled splendor and gloom. Speak to him, thou, for he hears, and spirit with spirit can meet. Closer is he than breathing, and nearer than hands and feet. God is law, say the wise. O soul, and let us rejoice, for if he thunder by law, the thunder is yet his voice. Law is God, say some. No God at all, says the fool. For all we have power to see is a straight staff bent in a pool. And the ear of man cannot hear, and the eye of man cannot see. But if we could see and hear this vision, were it not he? So in first encounter, and maybe the first time you're hearing this poem, you can get a bit lost, I think, in the kind of antithetical structure to it. The if it's not this, then it's that. I think it's also easy to get lost in a lot of the these and the thous throughout. I still, even though I know what they kind of translate to in more contemporary English, I still have to kind of pause and translate them in my head upon first encounter. But this poem is 9 couplets, so it's 18 lines, and it poses a lot of questions throughout those couplets. The couplets rhyme again with one another at the end rhyme, and they're rather lengthy lines so that you can kind of lose track of the rhyme as you go through. There are several instances of caesura throughout, especially within the first line of each couplet, and not really enjambment as we've seen before. He pretty much ends each verse or each line with some sort of punctuation, frequently a question, sometimes a comma. And what I think Tennyson's working through in this poem is trying to reconcile two visions of the world and God's relationship with the world that he saw to be incomplete or somewhat misconceived. And Tennyson was a pandeist, not strictly speaking a pantheist, but also not a deist in the sense that, Benjamin Franklin was, right? Of this kind of the watch and the watchmaker, where God creates the universe and then kind of lets it go and remains separate from the action of the world, but also the material aspects of the world that were created. Tennyson's also not, strictly speaking, a pantheist in the sense that he doesn't believe that everything material is God, but rather that everything material is a reflection of God, and thus contemplating those and experiencing those, God can be found in them. And I'm hearing that a lot when, at the beginning, when he says the sun, the moon, the stars, the seas, the hills and plains, are not these the vision of him who reigns, right? So this is something that was, all of these things are created by God. And then in the second couplet, he says it's not the vision. Dreams are true while they last, but do we not live in dreams? So what he's doing then is he's saying it's not a vision like something that's a plan or something that is a hallucination that's immaterial, but it's a vision that constitutes the reality that we also live inside of. All of the things that we're conceiving within our minds metaphysically is the reality that we're living in. And this is all just within the first 4 lines. Within line 6, he says they are sign and symbol of thy division from him. And that's an interesting way to phrase that, I think, because typically we think of signs as a sign is something that points the direction toward something else that it is not a part of categorically. So a stop sign tells you to stop. It is not the nature of stopping itself. Whereas a symbol seems to have a nature itself that possesses what it symbolizes. And like a sign, it gestures toward something greater, like a platonic form, right? So you might, for example, gift chocolates or a card or flowers to a loved one, and it's a symbol of your love. It is not all of love itself, but the gesture and the object contains the love and points to the greater reality of the love, the concept of the love that lives outside of it. And so what Tennyson's pushing at there in the 6th line is that these material things created by God can't be completely separate. They can't just be signs that remind you that there is a God, but that there has to be something within them as symbols that are also on a higher kind of metaphysical plane than just being material things. And in the second part of the poem, he's then kind of contemplating to what degree we can experience God in these symbols of nature that are on earth. He says it's closer than breathing and nearer than hands and feet. Closer than breathing, I have to think, is a reference to Genesis when God breathes life into man. And I think Tennyson's reading that as breathing life into man, but that man then is kind of separate or not part of God. And he's arguing against that reading there because he says immediately afterward, God is law, say the wise. And then God is law, say some, no God at all, says the fool. So he's trying to, I think, pick a lane there in between God is law, law is God, and then there's no God at all, right? And he's saying that if by the thunder, for if he thunder by law, the thunder is yet his voice. For we have power to see, all we have power to see is a straight staff bent in a pool. So it's almost, I think he's really describing this metaphysically in the sense of kind of Plato's allegory of the cave, that we exist as humans in a limited and imperfect form and relationship with nature. And so we can't directly glimpse the God of Tennyson's poem, but we can see the shadows or the forms or the images, but we have to understand them as more than just signs. We need to understand them as extensions of or symbols of this God, right? And then this is what he says in the final couplet where he's, I think, referencing back to Paul. And the ear of man cannot hear, and the eye of man cannot see, right? That's in Paul. Eye has not seen, ear has not heard what God has ready for those who love him. And then in the final line, but if we could see and hear this vision, were it not he. And so what's interesting is he says this vision, which again, a vision seems to be something that is imagined or conceptual and not the exact thing itself. But Tennyson's last line says, if we could see perfectly the vision or the dream, that too is to experience or to apprehend God. I found this to be a really fascinating poem, and it introduced me to this concept of pantheism, which I had heard of pantheism and I had heard of deism before, but what I think Tennyson is arguing for here, or imagining through this poem, is a God who creates everything, creates the entire universe, but then cannot live and remain separate and outside of it. So after the creation, I think Tennyson would say through this poem, God then sort of became the universe. God could be expressed as the soul of the universe rather than a creator outside of one's creation. And that's given me a lot to think about. And hopefully, if you're still with me at this point of the video, that you find that to be an interesting and provoking thought as well. I intend to come back to Tennyson multiple times throughout this series because I find each of his poems to be, highly stylized to the point that they're somewhat difficult to read, but to pack a lot of thought-provoking ideas within just a short period. I wish you all peace and have a wonderful and a beautiful Saturday.